A white racist police officer humiliates and arrests a black FBI agent, but when she reveals her identity, it leaves the officer in shock. What happens when the line between justice and injustice is crossed so boldly that no one can ignore it? In a city where racism still casts a shadow over institutions, an act of abuse of power can ignite a flame of resistance and unexpected revelations. In the turbulent city of Chicago, structural racism still seeps into every corner. At the heart of this reality is Ethan Wallace, a 42-year-old white police officer who finds himself in a situation that will forever change his life and the lives of others. Ethan, a man shaped by a childhood in a small town where prejudice was the norm, patrols the streets with an arrogance that reflects his backward beliefs. He believes he is fulfilling his duty to maintain order, but his distorted view of justice quickly puts him on a collision course with the truth. Riley Thompson, a 35-year-old FBI agent, also walks the streets of Chicago, but under a very different light. Raised in a poor neighborhood in Detroit, she has become a resilient woman, educated in law and determined to fight against the injustices she has witnessed throughout her life. Riley is more than just an agent. She is a fighter who, despite facing racism and sexism, stands firm in her mission. However, her determination will be brutally tested when Ethan, in an arbitrary approach, decides to ignore her badge and arrest a woman who just wanted to do her job. The tension explodes in a moment of public humiliation, where Riley finds herself discredited and imprisoned, a symbol of what the system can do to those who challenge its norms. This traumatic experience transforms into an unrelenting quest for justice, not only for herself, but for all those who have been silenced and disrespected. Meanwhile, Marcus Harris, a black investigative journalist, observes the scene. He knows Riley from before, and upon learning of her arrest, feels the urgency to act. Marcus, who has always used his voice to expose injustices, finds himself in a dilemma: how to bring to light such a dark truth without putting his own life at risk. The connection between them strengthens as he dives into the investigation, revealing a web of corruption that permeates the police force. At the top of the FBI hierarchy, Olivia Carter, Riley's supervisor, finds herself torn. Respected but under pressure, she hesitates to act, fearing the consequences her decision might bring. However, Riley's courage and Marcus's determination inspire her to seek the truth, even if it means risking her own career. As these characters intertwine, Chicago transforms into a battleground. What began as an isolated act of racism turns into a wave of protests, challenging the city to confront its darkest truths. The climax of the story is not just about exposing Ethan, but about the deep scars left on Riley and Marcus's lives, who now find themselves fighting not only for justice, but for the very essence of who they are. This engaging narrative reveals not only each character's individual struggle, but also the collective battle for justice in a society that still needs to confront its own demons. What happens after humiliation and arrest becomes a cry for change, a call for everyone to look in the mirror and question, how far would you go to fight for what is right? Ethan Wallace felt secure in his position. The uniform he wore was not just a uniform, but an armor that protected him from any criticism. His colleagues supported him, and he believed he was on the right side of the law. However, Riley Thompson's arrest cast a shadow over his conviction. He could not see that his act of authority, which seemed so just in his mind, was actually a reflection of his own prejudices. The image of Riley with her hands handcuffed became a scar on his conscience, even if he did not want to admit it. Riley, on the other hand, was in a moment of vulnerability. The humiliation of being arrested by a police officer who was supposed to protect the community deeply wounded her, not only for being discredited, but for being stripped of her dignity. She felt lost in a world that seemed to have turned its back on her. The fire of indignation burned within her, but the pain of betrayal and the doubt about her ability to fight against this oppressive system began to undermine her confidence. With each passing day, the pressure to conform grew, but Riley knew that if she did, she would be betraying not only herself, but all those who were fighting for justice. Meanwhile, Marcus Harris watched the scene unfold from a distance. The investigative journalist had seen many cases of injustice throughout his career, but Riley's arrest touched him in a different way. He knew her struggle, understood the difficulties she faced as a woman in a hostile environment, and recognized the daily battle against racism. Marcus had gone through his own battles, fighting to assert himself in a field dominated by white voices. Now he felt he needed to act, not only to protect a friend, but to expose a truth that many preferred to ignore. Marcus's decision was not easy. He knew that by digging deep into Riley's case, he was putting his own safety at risk. The Chicago police force was not known for its tolerance of criticism, and he had seen colleagues suffer severe consequences for exposing corruption. But the idea of remaining silent in the face of injustice consumed him. Every word he wrote in his notebook became a silent cry for change. He needed to find a balance between his professional ambition and his personal ethics, and that would lead him to difficult decisions. At the top of the FBI hierarchy, Olivia Carter wrestled with her own uncertainties. She admired Riley's courage, but the pressure to maintain order within the institution left her hesitant. Throughout her career, Olivia had learned to navigate turbulent waters, but now she found herself facing a moral dilemma. If she supported Riley, she could be seen as a traitor, a woman who challenged the hierarchy in the name of justice. However, Riley's determination and the urgency of the situation forced her to reflect on her own beliefs. Would she be willing to risk everything to do what was right? As the first obstacles emerged, each of the characters faced their own internal battles. Ethan, consumed by doubt, began to question his beliefs. He found himself in a maze of thoughts, where his vision of justice was challenged by a new reality. The image of Riley, with eyes full of indignation, wouldn't leave his mind. The echoes of her voice repeated in his head, making him reconsider everything he believed to be true. Riley faced a mountain of emotional challenges. The pain of humiliation turned into an increasing pressure to rise up and fight. She knew she needed to find strength within herself to avoid being crushed. But doubt began to erode her determination. The idea that her struggle could be in vain took root in her heart. She needed support, but the fear of being discredited again kept her silent. Marcus, in turn, struggled to balance his pursuit of truth with the risks it posed. With each new discovery, he felt closer to exposing the corruption, but also more vulnerable. He knew that every written word could mean the difference between justice and oppression. However, external pressure and the threats that could arise from his investigation forced him to reflect on how far he was willing to go for a cause that seemed so distant yet so urgent. In this uncertain landscape, friendships began to form and strengthen, but they were also tested. The connection between Riley and Marcus grew as they shared their stories. They found solace in each other, but the challenges they faced threatened to shake this new friendship. Ethan, on the other hand, wondered if he could change, if he could redeem himself, and if the friendship he had with his colleagues would become a burden on his journey of self-discovery. The city of Chicago became a battleground, where each one fought their own internal wars, while the struggle for justice intensified. What started as an abuse of power was now transforming into a movement that challenged established structures. The scars of the past became visible, and each character found themselves on the brink of a transformation that could change their lives forever. Ethan walked the streets of Chicago, the weight of the uniform pressing on his shoulders. The sense of security that once enveloped him was now replaced by a whirlwind of emotions. He could no longer look at the reflection of his own face without remembering the image of Riley. Handcuffed and vulnerable, each step seemed to echo the doubt that consumed him. He had acted with conviction, but now he found himself trapped in a web of regret and confusion. The conversations with his colleagues, once filled with support, now sounded empty. How could he continue to defend a system that seemed flawed? The internal struggle left him exhausted, and he began to question whether his sense of justice was, in fact, a reflection of his own fears and prejudices. Before we continue with this gripping story, take a moment to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any stories. And let us know which city you are watching this video from in the comments. Meanwhile, Riley felt as if she were in a labyrinth with no exit. The humiliation of arrest was not just a mark on her life, but an open wound that never seemed to heal. The pressure to conform was overwhelming, and she often found herself wondering if her struggle was truly valid. Each passing day, doubt dominated her thoughts. The voices of support that once were a balm now seemed distant. She felt alone, lost in a system that seemed to have abandoned those who needed help the most. The idea of fighting alone terrified her, but the determination not to be crushed by injustice was a fire burning within her. Marcus, for his part, found himself in a dilemma. His investigation into Riley's arrest was becoming increasingly complicated. He discovered that there was a network of corruption involved, where the voices of people like Riley were often silenced. With each new fact he uncovered, he felt his heart race, but also a growing shadow of fear. He knew that his work could expose him to retaliation, and the thought of putting his family and friends at risk haunted him. The desire for justice pulsed within him, but insecurity made him hesitate. He needed a strategy, something that would not only protect himself but also ensure Riley's safety. The pressure mounted, and he wondered if it would be worth risking everything for a truth that could be ignored. Olivia, at the top of the FBI hierarchy, felt the weight of her own responsibilities. The admiration for Riley and her fight for justice was overshadowed by the need to maintain order within the institution. Each time she considered publicly supporting Riley, a wave of fear paralyzed her. What would happen to her career? And what if her actions were seen as betrayal? This internal struggle consumed her, and she found herself torn between loyalty to her position and the need to do what was right. Riley's determination inspired her, but the uncertainty of its consequences left her hesitant. With each passing day, the pressure mounted, and the decision to act became more agonizing. Tensions began to rise when Riley decided she could no longer remain silent. She started meeting with others who had faced similar injustices, forming a small support group. However, she soon realized there was a risk. Some members of the group were known for being confrontational, which attracted unwanted attention from the police. Insecurity grew with each meeting, and Riley wondered if she was putting herself and her friends in danger. The emotional scars she carried began to manifest physically. Sleepless nights and constant anxiety left her exhausted. She needed an outlet, but the struggle to find a safe path seemed almost impossible. Meanwhile, Ethan, in his quest for answers, began to approach Riley in an unexpected way. He wanted to understand her perspective, but feared that his support might be seen as betrayal by his peers. The friendship he had with them prevented him from stepping forward. At the same time, he was drawn to Riley's courage. Her determination made her an admirable figure, but doubt about his own actions paralyzed him. Every time he tried to get closer, his inner voice of fear held him back. He was torn between what was right and what society expected of him. The interactions among the characters grew more complex. Riley and Marcus developed a strong friendship, but external pressure threatened that connection. Marcus wanted to help Riley, but the need to protect his own career made him hesitate. The fear that their friendship could be used against them left them in a delicate position, and doubts about each other's loyalty began to surface. Emotional tension escalated, and each of them realized that their choices could have devastating consequences. The city of Chicago, now a microcosm of struggle and resistance, reflected each character's internal battle. Each faced their own limitations and doubts, and the pursuit of justice became a challenging path filled with obstacles and twists. Friendships were tested, and personal struggles intertwined, creating a scenario where truth and justice needed to prevail, even in the face of adversity. Meanwhile, each person's choice became increasingly significant, and the city awaited their decision. The transformation they were about to experience would not only change their lives, but also leave an indelible. Ethan was at home, but his mind couldn't find rest. The image of Riley handcuffed and vulnerable wouldn't leave his head. As he looked out the window, the night in Chicago seemed darker than ever. He thought about how his life had changed since that fateful day. The uniform that once made him feel secure now weighed like an anchor, tethering him to a sea of doubts and regrets. Suddenly, his phone vibrated. It was a message from Marcus. "We need to meet." "It's urgent." Ethan's heart raced. The tone of the message sounded serious, and he knew that whatever Marcus had to say would be important. After a few minutes of indecision, he decided he needed to hear what his friend had to say. When he arrived at the cafe where they had agreed to meet, the tension in the air was palpable. Marcus looked nervous, glancing around as if expecting someone to be watching him. "Ethan, I discovered something that could change everything," Marcus said, his voice trembling slightly. "There's a recording, a conversation between some officers that shows how Riley was treated unfairly. They were just following orders from above, but this is more than just a mistake, it's corruption." What Marcus said hit Ethan like a punch to the gut. He remembered how, in his position, he had defended those officers, believing they were doing what was right. Now, everything felt like "And now? What are we going to do with this?" Ethan asked, his voice barely a whisper. "We need to expose this, but it's risky. If they find out we're investigating, it could be dangerous, not just for us, but for Riley too," Marcus replied, his eyes filled with concern. The truth began to form in Ethan's mind like a storm. He realized that throughout his career, he had trusted the system and his own convictions too much. He had failed to see the injustice that was right in front of him. Marcus's revelation was a double-edged sword. It could be the key to freeing Riley, but it could also put them in danger. Ethan felt a weight in his stomach. He recalled the conversations with his colleagues, the support that seemed so solid, but now sounded empty. He had been part of something that not only failed, but harmed innocent people. The need for justice that had guided him now felt like nothing more than an illusion, a facade that hid the cruel truth of the world they lived in. "I don't know if I have the courage for this," Ethan said. His voice choked. "What if we get caught? What if something happens to Riley?" Marcus stared at him intently. "And if we do nothing? What if we let the injustice continue? We have to act, Ethan. We can't just stand still." Marcus's words echoed in his mind. Riley's struggle wasn't just hers. It was a fight for everyone who had been silenced. Ethan realized that his hesitation wasn't just about the fear of repercussions, but about his own failure to act when he should have. He felt the pressure mounting, as if he were being called to make a decision that would change the course of his life. The conversation with Marcus ignited a flame within him. He remembered Riley, her courage and determination, and how she hadn't given up even when everything seemed lost. If Riley could confront the system, why couldn't he? Ethan felt a new determination in his voice as he said they needed to do something. They couldn't let this happen to anyone else. As they spoke, the reality of what they were about to do began to take shape. They would need to be strategic, cautious, but the idea of staying silent was no longer an option. The fight for justice was not just a choice, it was a necessity. The emotional impact of this decision hit Ethan hard. He felt he was finally taking control of his life, facing his fears and past failures. This revelation not only challenged him, but also freed him. From that moment on, he would no longer be just a spectator in the fight for justice, but an agent of change. In doing so, he would not only honor Riley's struggle, but also redeem himself. When Ethan and Marcus left the cafe, the night was still dark, but there was a new light in their hearts. They were ready to face the challenges ahead, united by a cause greater than themselves. The city of Chicago, with its shadows and uncertainties, now felt like a battlefield where truth and justice could finally have a chance to prevail. Ethan felt a mix of relief and anxiety as he walked alongside Marcus through the cold streets of Chicago. The decision to act, to expose corruption and fight for justice was a personal victory, but it was also a heavy burden. He was no longer just a police officer. He was a man determined to correct a wrong, and this responsibility followed him like a shadow. In the following days, Ethan's routine changed drastically. He distanced himself from his usual work, dedicating himself to gathering information about the recording Marcus had mentioned. The nights were long and tense, filled with heated discussions with Marcus about how to proceed. Ethan couldn't shake the persistent thought that, at any moment, they could be. The fear of retaliation weighed heavily on him, but the idea of leaving Riley and other innocents without help was even more unbearable. One afternoon, while reviewing documents in his apartment, Ethan received a message from Riley. His heart raced at the sight of her name on the screen. She wrote that she was thinking of him and hoped he was well. That simple message brought a mix of hope and pain. He remembered her gaze, the vulnerability he felt when he saw her that way. Ethan wished he could protect her, but now he felt that every move he made could put her life at risk. That same night, when he met with Marcus, Ethan shared the message. He expressed his hurt, saying that she was trapped but still worried about him. His voice trembled as he asked what would happen if he failed, or if everything ended badly for her. Marcus, always the steady support, put a hand on Ethan's shoulder and reminded him that he wasn't alone in this. They were in it together and needed to remember that the fight was for her and for everyone without a voice. They couldn't let fear paralyze them. These words brought some comfort, but the truth was that the pressure was only mounting. With every piece of information they gathered and every step they took, new obstacles arose. One of them was that some colleagues began to notice the change in Ethan's behavior. He tried to act normally, but the tension in his gaze and the whispered conversations between him and Marcus didn't go unnoticed. On a particularly difficult day, Ethan was approached by a longtime partner, Jake. Jake expressed genuine concern, asking if Ethan was okay, as he seemed to be carrying something heavy on his shoulders. The question made Ethan's heart race. He couldn't share his struggle. He replied that he was just tired, and that work had been intense trying to hide the truth, but the lie only deepened his anguish. Ethan's life had become a game of hiding. He felt like a thief in his own profession, always looking over his shoulder, fearing that someone would discover his intentions. With each passing day, he felt more isolated. The weight of responsibility suffocated him, and a sense of loneliness began to seep into his life. One night, while reviewing the recordings with Marcus again, he lost himself in thought. He wondered what had happened to the man he used to be. He used to believe in what he did, but now everything felt like a lie. Marcus looked at him, understanding the pain evident in Ethan's eyes. He reminded Ethan that he was transforming, and that was normal. They were fighting for something worthwhile, and that changed who they were. He urged Ethan not to forget why they were doing this. Those words reignited Ethan's determination, but with each passing day, the fear grew stronger. He knew that the truth they sought could come at a high cost. Once, as they left the cafe where they met, Ethan felt someone following him. Adrenaline surged and he turned quickly, only to find a stranger looking at him. The man quickly averted his gaze, but the feeling of being watched lingered. Over time, the pressure began to affect not only his work, but also his personal relationships. He distanced himself from friends and family, unable to share what was really happening. Ethan's life had become a precarious balance between the fight for justice and the desperate desire to protect those he loved. As he reflected on all of this, an idea began to form in his mind. Perhaps, instead of acting alone, he could seek allies, people who also believed in the truth and were willing to fight alongside him. The possibility of joining forces brought new energy to Ethan. What had once seemed like a solitary battle could now transform into a collective struggle. He knew that the path ahead would be difficult, filled with challenges and risks, but for the first time in a long while he felt that there was hope. The fight for truth was not just his, it was a cause that could unite others, and in doing so, Ethan realized that the courage he had been seeking was not just within himself, but in the community he could form around a common goal. Ethan looked out the window of his apartment, watching the city lights flicker on at dusk. The reality of his life, which had once been simple and secure, now felt like a roller coaster of emotions and uncertainties. He remembered how it all began, how the desire to do the right thing led him down a path full of obstacles. The weight of responsibility grew heavier each day, but a spark of hope began to shine within him. As he reflected on his journey, Ethan realized that the fear that paralyzed him was not just a reflection of his fight against corruption, but also of his internal struggle. He felt like a stranger in his own skin, battling insecurity and doubt. The pressure to act, to expose the truth, forced him to confront his own weaknesses. At first he hesitated to accept help. Pride and fear of failure kept him trapped in agonizing solitude. But, with Marcus's unwavering support, Ethan began to understand that he didn't have to carry this burden alone. He saw how Marcus, despite the difficulties, remained steadfast and encouraged those around him. This unlikely friendship became a pillar of strength for Ethan. Each conversation, each planning session, helped shape his confidence, and he started to open up more, sharing his worries and fears. It was as if a part of him was finally emerging from the shadows, allowing the light of hope to enter. The idea of forming a support community began to take shape in his mind. He realized that many of his colleagues might be facing similar challenges. Corruption and injustice were not just issues affecting isolated individuals. They were matters that impacted everyone. With this new perspective, Ethan decided to take action. He began speaking with some of his colleagues, sharing his concerns and the need for change. At first he encountered resistance. Some were skeptical, fearful of the repercussions they might face. But over time, Ethan used his sincerity and the passion he felt for the truth to inspire others. He realized that many were tired of pretending that everything was fine and wanted to come together for a common purpose. That feeling of loneliness that had accompanied him began to dissipate, giving way to a sense of belonging and purpose. Ethan's transformation was not limited to his professional life. He began to apply what he learned about trust and collaboration in his personal life. He allowed himself to be more vulnerable with Riley, sharing his fears and uncertainties. To his surprise, she supported him in ways he had never expected. The connection between them deepened, and together they began to face the challenges that life imposed upon them. The love they felt for each other became a source of strength, and Ethan realized that confronting problems head-on was the only way to overcome them. As the support community grew, Ethan felt stronger than ever. The meetings became a safe space to share ideas and strategies, and the fear of reprisals began to fade. With each step they took, Ethan's confidence in himself grew, and he felt that he was truly making a difference. Whispers of distrust transformed into united voices calling for justice. Ethan also learned to value what really mattered. Success was not just about exposing corruption, it was about connecting with people, about collective struggle, and about the ability to inspire change. He realized that true wealth lay in shared experiences, in friendships formed, and in the courage to fight for something greater. In the end, Ethan's journey was not just about combating corruption, it was a journey of self-discovery, growth, and transformation. He learned to trust himself, to accept help, and to appreciate the strength that comes from unity. By facing his fears, Ethan became a renewed man, ready to fight for truth and justice. And as he looked back, he saw not only the challenges he had overcome, but also the lessons he had learned and the people who had helped him become who he truly was. Ethan was about to face the greatest challenge of his life. After weeks of meetings and planning, the group he had helped to form was about to gather for an event that could change everything. They had managed to schedule a press conference to expose the evidence of corruption they had gathered, a crucial step in bringing the truth to light. But as the day approached, fear and anxiety began to take hold of him once again. That morning, Ethan looked at himself in the mirror and for a moment almost didn't recognize the person reflected. The man who once felt lost and paralyzed now had a determined glimmer in his eyes, but the pressure of what was to come was palpable. He remembered the conversations with Marcus, the hours they spent discussing strategies, and Riley, who always encouraged him to fight. The strength he felt through these friendships was undeniable, but the weight of being the spokesperson for the truth made him nervous. As he arrived at the press conference location, Ethan noticed the tense atmosphere. Reporters crowded around, cameras were ready to record, and the sound of voices blended into an unsettling buzz. He looked at his colleagues, who were just as nervous as he was, and felt the responsibility he bore. What was at stake was not just his reputation, but the safety of everyone involved. Each of them could face serious consequences if the situation did not unfold as planned. Entering the room, Ethan felt adrenaline coursing through his body. He stared at the microphone and for a moment was paralyzed. The past seemed to return, memories of insecurity and doubt flooding his mind. But then, he remembered all the moments that had led him there, Marcus's support, Riley's encouraging words, and the solidarity of the group that had formed around him. He took a deep breath and reminded himself that the truth needed to be revealed. When he began to speak, his voice trembled, but he did not hesitate. He shared the evidence they had gathered, meticulously describing the corruption that had been hidden for so long. As he spoke, he saw the faces of the reporters light up with interest. He spoke with sincerity, and the passion he felt for justice began to shine through his words. However, as he delved deeper into his explanation, a man in a dark suit who had remained silent until then stood up. He was the lawyer for one of the companies involved in the corruption. With a look of disdain, he started making accusations against Ethan and his group, trying to discredit their evidence and threatening legal action. The atmosphere became tense. Ethan felt his heart race, doubt threatening to return. But instead of backing down, something inside him ignited. He remembered how he had overcome his fears, the strength he had found in unity with his friends. With renewed determination, Ethan looked directly into the lawyer's eyes and responded. He was not there just to expose corruption. He was there to defend the truth. With each word, his confidence grew. He began to cite data and testimonies that proved the corruption, and the room fell silent, absorbing his statements. By the end, the press conference transformed into a turning point. The reporters, now with sharpened interest, began to ask questions, and the public's attention shifted to Ethan and his group's courage. He realized he was no longer alone. The solidarity among them solidified in that moment, and they were all ready to fight together. After the press conference, Ethan left the room with a light heart. He had faced his greatest fear and emerged victorious. More than that, he had discovered that true strength lay in unity, friendship, and the courage to speak the truth. He realized that, even in the face of difficulties, he had found his purpose, and the fight for justice was a collective journey. When he met with Marcus and Riley later, they exchanged knowing glances. It was not just a victory for Ethan, but for everyone who believed in truth and justice. They had overcome challenges, and Ethan's transformation was complete. He was no longer the solitary man hesitant to act. He was a symbol of strength and hope, ready to face any obstacle that came his way. And so, looking out the window of his apartment that night, the city lights shone brighter than ever. Ethan felt that true wealth was not in material possessions, but in the courage to fight for a better world and in the friendships that accompanied him on this journey. He knew the fight was not over, but he was more prepared than ever to face whatever came next. After the press conference, Ethan felt a mix of relief and adrenaline pulsing through his body. He knew he had taken an important step, but the consequences of his actions were starting to manifest. The phone kept ringing. Messages arrived incessantly, and the media attention seemed endless. As the days passed, the repercussions of the revelations from the press conference spread like fire in dry straw. At work, Ethan noticed that some colleagues looked at him differently. There were whispers and glances around him, and he couldn't shake the feeling of exposure. While some supported him, others were afraid to associate with him, fearing reprisals. At home, the pressure increased. His parents, worried for their son's safety, called frequently, asking if he was okay, if he needed help. Ethan tried to reassure them, but the truth was that he was scared too. That night, gathered with Marcus and Riley in a cafe, Ethan finally opened up. He said he felt he had done the right thing, but he couldn't stop worrying. What if they retaliated? What if something happened to them? He looked at his friends seeking support. Marcus, ever calm, placed a hand on Ethan's arm. He said, "Courage is not the absence of fear. You did something incredible, and many are now standing by our side. We are not alone." Riley, who always had a way of finding light in the darkest situations, smiled. "Ethan, what you did inspired other people. We've already heard reports of people who decided to speak out too. You lit a flame, and that is powerful. Don't be afraid to be a leader." Their words resonated with Ethan, and he remembered what had motivated him to act. There was a whole community that needed support, and he had become a symbol of hope for many. However, insecurity still loomed over him like a persistent shadow. As weeks passed, the pressure increased. The lawyer for the company involved in the corruption did not back down and began to file legal actions against Ethan and his group. The atmosphere became tense, and the media began to question the veracity of the evidence presented. Ethan found himself once again at the center of a storm, but this time he was more prepared. He met with the group once more, and this meeting was crucial. "We need to support each other. We cannot let them break us," he said, his voice firm. "If we have the truth on our side, we must fight for it. Let's gather more evidence, listen to more testimonies. We cannot give in to the pressure." Ethan's words echoed in the room. Everyone agreed, understanding that the fight was just beginning. They decided to join forces with other organizations fighting against corruption and injustice. What started as a small group of friends quickly transformed into a larger movement, engaging more and more people who felt inspired by Ethan's courage. Amid all this, Ethan also began to notice changes within himself. The insecurity that once paralyzed him was giving way to a growing confidence. He was no longer the man who hesitated to act. He had found his voice and his purpose. The fight for justice had become an extension of his identity, filling him with a new sense of fulfillment. One night, as he looked out the window of his apartment, Ethan realized how the city was changing. The lights shone brightly, but now they seemed even more intense, as if each one represented a voice rising against injustice. He smiled as he remembered his friend's words. The truth was spreading, and he was part of something bigger. When Marcus and Riley arrived to visit him, they brought news. "We have support from several influential people. They want to join us," Marcus said, his eyes shining with excitement. Ethan felt a wave of hope. This new phase of the struggle was not just his, it belonged to everyone. "We are just getting started," Riley said, smiling. "Together, we can make a difference." Ethan nodded, feeling the strength of the friendship and solidarity surrounding him. He knew the journey would be long and full of challenges, but now, more than ever, he was ready to face them. The fight for truth and justice had become not only his mission, but a collective effort that united people around a common goal. And so, with a heart full of determination, he committed to moving forward alongside his friends in search of a better future. As the fight for justice intensified, Ethan felt that his life had changed forever. The time he spent with Marcus and Riley, along with the new alliances formed, brought a new meaning to his journey. He was no longer just a young man hesitant to make decisions. He had become a leader, someone who inspired others to stand up and fight for what they believed in. The pressure from the media and legal actions against him was still there, but Ethan began to see it in a new light. The threats became fuel for his determination. He realized that each message of support, each testimony he received, reinforced the idea that he was not alone. Over time, the messages of support began to outnumber those of hate, helping him withstand the storm brewing around him. Ethan decided that the time to act had come. He organized a large demonstration in the city, an event that would bring together all those who wanted to fight against corruption. He wanted to show that the truth had power, and that together they were stronger. The city, which once seemed imposing and threatening, was now transforming into a battleground where hope reigned. On the day of the event, the square was packed. People of all ages united under the same banner, and the energy was palpable. Ethan, standing on a platform, looked at the crowd and felt a mix of emotion and gratitude. He spoke about his journey, the fear he faced, and the importance of standing up against injustice. His words resonated among those present, and a cry of support echoed in the square. But it was not just a demonstration, it was also an act of revenge. The company's lawyer, who had tried to dismantle his fight, was present, and Ethan knew it was the right moment to expose the truth. With the crowd's support, he revealed new evidence showing the extent of the corruption and how it affected the lives of so many people. The revelation landed like a bomb, and the lawyer, once so confident, was now visibly shaken. At that moment, Ethan realized that his journey was not just about justice, but also about new beginnings. He not only stood up against injustice, but also helped others find their voice. The feeling of revenge that once seemed dark and negative was transformed into a powerful act of collective justice. He had managed to unmask those who tried to silence him. By the end of the day, as the crowd dispersed, Ethan reflected on everything that had happened. He was no longer the same. He had found strength in his vulnerability and courage in his fears. The true wealth he gained was not material, but the friendship and solidarity he cultivated along the way. He understood that success would no longer be measured by individual achievements, but by how he impacted the lives of those around him. Ethan's journey was not just about fighting against corruption. It was a lesson about the importance of friendship, courage, and the power of truth. He realized that the world needed more people willing to stand up and fight for what is right. And so, as he looked at the illuminated city before him, he smiled, knowing he had fulfilled his mission. Now he invited everyone to reflect on their own battles. What voices were silenced around them? What struggles needed to be fought? He encouraged everyone to join this fight for truth and justice. It is time to act. Share your stories, your experiences. Together, we can make a difference. Every like, every subscription helps spread this message. Don't wait any longer. Change begins now.